Welcome everybody. My name is Tom Wild from Pro Writing Aid, and I'd like to welcome you to another Ask a Book Doctor session. My guest, as always, I've run out of ways to introduce her, but the one and only, the unique Sally OJ. How are you doing tonight, Sally?
I'm doing really well, Tom. Thank you. I don't know if you can hear. I've got two, big skylights in this room, and the rain is pattering on them, which is a lovely sound. But in case you think I've got a typing pool in here, it's actually the rain. The rain on the window is a very nice sound, and I'm doing well.
It's just started, hasn't it? Although we have had a day of rain on and off here in Brighton. Yeah. Sal, tonight we are looking back at one of our old favorites, show don't tell, and it's a term that's frequently bandied about in writing communities in the world of writing, and talked about as something that people consistently get wrong or don't understand. So let's just go back to a bit of what we covered last year and just look at, firstly, where do people go wrong with show don't tell, and how do we classify it? How do we recognize it?
People go wrong primarily because it's not explained very well, and that's almost uniformly across the, if you look it up online, if you look it up in books, I understand show don't tell really well, and if I look it up, it's bewildering. So I always use this one quote, and I've used it before in the session we did last year. I always say, this is all you need to know about show don't tell, and it's from Anton Chekhov, from whom we get some really good writing tips. And he used to write to his friends about writing, and you get some really good stuff from these letters. And he said about this very problem: don't tell me that the moon is shining, show me the glint of light on broken glass. So we can go now. That's it. That's done.
You've used some great examples before as well, Sal. I know, and you've shared some examples of how this has come across in some of the work the books that you've worked on. But it's an incredibly common problem, particularly among new writers.
Yeah, and partly because I think they've heard about it and they desperately want to not do it. And of course, the more you do that, really, all you need to remember with show don't tell is that the idea is to make the reader feel like they are there in the scene with the characters, not being told about it by you.
Love that.
So that's it. It's that simple. And so it's all very well to say, we went to the beach, it was a bit cold, so we came home again. Okay. But, our feet crunched over the shingle as we huddled into our coats, the wind whipping our face. I mean, that's a bit purple prose, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Then we're there on the beach with you. So
I always, in my head, Sal, I always picture almost picking up your reader. Imagine a small person picking them up and dropping them in the scene where, that you're setting. How do you...
Believe me, Tom, if I could, I would. It's like one of those 1960s science fiction films.
Yes.
So this is really all you need to do. You just need to bring your reader into the scene. And people are scared of purple prose. I tipped over a bit into purple prose there with the wind whipping your face. But you can do, if you're a good writer, you can carry it off a bit of detail, because bringing sensory detail into a scene is really helpful. The sights, the smells, the sounds, the gravel crunch and shingle crunching under your feet is a great one, because you've got several sensory things going on there. But you don't have to do it for the whole scene. If you did it for the whole scene, it would become a bit too much. But if you just drop in moments of sensory stuff, you drop in moments of dialogue, this is really helpful. So you can have quite a long scene, which is all tell, but if it's broken up with moments of dialogue,
okay,
and ideally dialogue with some nice dialogue tags or signifiers, as I call them, which is, which gives a bit of detail about the room or again, sensory stuff or whatever. That's a great way of pulling your readers in. So it's just, I'm going to repeat myself, it's just about making the reader feel that they are there in the story with the protagonists, and making it feel as if they're experiencing it through the character's own feelings, responses, and actions, and not through your summary of that.
I'd love to hear some examples. Of course,
you have to do it sometimes. Of course, you have to do it sometimes. But the more you can just pull us in, sometimes that will. And again, the thing that I always say is look at some of your favorite books. You'll see that there's pages and pages of telling. But what they do is that they drop in these moments of showing, and that keeps us engaged, and that makes us feel like we're there. It makes us feel like we're in the moment. So it's getting the balance right that's really important.
I just before we go on, I'd just like to hear from any of our listeners, our joiners today. What was it for you that kind of when the penny dropped, if you like, or is this something that you don't struggle with and actually you think is remarkably easy to get right? Or on the flip side, who does continue to struggle with kind of bringing the reader into the scene, as Sal's described? So if you have got anything to add to that, do drop that into chat, please.
When we were talking the other day, Tom, I remember I remember partly because you reminded me of it, so thank you very much. We used this example. I said it's all very well to say he was upset. So you give us that fact, so we now know that your protagonist is upset. But if you say, I think what I said was he felt blindly behind him from a chair, and sort of something about his legs went weak and he felt blindly behind him for a chair, his heart racing or something, then you don't have to say he was upset.
Yeah,
you show it to us. You don't tell us. That is the thing. You show us. You don't tell us. That's the difference. So again, we can all go home now.
I guess the difficulties, I guess, as it can be very easy to get caught up in the writing, and you've got to pay attention. You've got to be focused on your work to realize actually I'm telling too much and not showing enough. And there's some interesting comments coming in. So yes. Oh, thank you, Razi. So the notion of sensory input really helped me. That's a really interesting point. I think it did me as well, Razi. So Amanda, I struggle with showing my character's thoughts in the scene. And Leslie said, I struggle with not using the same words or phrases several times. That's an interesting point.
Repetition can be a real problem. What helps with repetition? One day I'm going to be rumbled and somebody's going to watch all of these all at once. And they're going to say, she just says the same thing over and over again. Repetition is really easy to spot when you read out loud. Reading out loud solves so many problems, and even better if you can get somebody to read your work out loud to you, which is a huge ask.
Yeah,
it's a big ask, but it's because you see where they stumble, you'll hear it, you'll hear the same thing coming back twice. But I recognize that's not quite what the question, the comment was. The comment was that they know they're repeating themselves, they just find it difficult not to. But this is, and again, repeating what I say, part of being a writer, after you get to a certain point, once you get to the point that I imagine all our authors today are at, you've got to start pushing yourself. It's hard work. You've got to start challenging yourself and pushing yourself. And this is one of the things that comes up over and over again. And this is one of the things that Show Don't Tell is a part of, is people not pushing themselves. And I sound like a parent, don't I? You've got to push yourself. But it is really true that once you're sort of very comfortable, you must start stretching. You must start pushing and stretching and being more imaginative and being more creative and thinking. So you're the person who asked the question there, I'm sorry I didn't catch the name, or didn't ask the question, stated the issue, is aware of the problem. That's fantastic. That's a huge part of the battle won. Now they have to really sit down and think, right, how am I going to solve this? I'm a writer. How am I going to solve this? Maybe I'm going to look at some books that I like to see what they do. Maybe I'm going to rewrite the same paragraph 20 times until I come up with something. You know, this is what you have to do. And gradually, it's like driving a car. It will become second nature.
I always find putting it to one side till the next day and taking a fresh pair of eyes to it.
Exactly.
There's some great, actually, and in chat, thank you everybody so much, because there's some great tips in there. Jay Moogs, I have to drop in the show when I edit for the first time, then expand in further edits. That's a great, simple technique. Okay, if you recognize it in the first. If it's something that maybe you're aware that is not a strong point of yours, and the first time you edit, that's when you can catch it through reading out loud or whatever your technique is, and then expand on it in further edits. I think that now an interesting point, so someone else, Sal, just mentioned that they discover that showing resulted in more words. Is that an issue?
Yes. Well, yes, and that's why a lot of people avoid it, I think, especially if they're trying to keep their work. But this is, again, it comes back to what I was just talking about. Yes, it is more words. So you've got to push, you know, part of being a writer is working out the solution to that. I mean, I know I can't, you know, it's my job to explain these things. I can't just keep saying, well, you've got to work it out. But part of it is just having to work it out.
Yeah.
If I'm working with somebody, of course, you know, one-to-one, I will try and address all of these problems. But yes, it will put your word count out if you don't cut somewhere else. So you're going to have to cut somewhere else. And an awful lot of telling is waffle. An awful lot of telling is just padding and waffle. And it can be very nice padding, but it's still padding. So an awful lot of telling can go.
And actually, yeah, like you say, this is still, that's not a reason not to do it. Something that Tom mentioned, thank you, Tom, showing reaction when I got into the character's fear. So yeah, so actually getting into the feeling of your character, and then the reader said that they were with him. That made the penny drop. That's great. Really,
that's brilliant. That's exactly what you want to do. That's really brilliant.
Yeah, great. I'm sorry, I'm just working through using dialogue tags to bring in sensory bits. That's great. So please do all these comments. I can't keep up with them with chat actually, but that's great, and I hope they're helpful to others out there. And another good evidence, I suppose, that, you know, being part of a writers group where you can share these ideas, where you can talk about the things you're struggling with, is time very, very well spent. Okay, so we talked about, you know, sensory language. We talked about dialogue. Anything else? I think one thing you mentioned the other day, enhanced description, you mentioned as well.
I mean, when you enhanced description doesn't have to be, you know, it's what we talked about, not wanting to fall over into purple prose, but it's the same kind of thing. If you know, the dust on a banister, you know, the smell of cooking in a hall, not cabbage, please, in the hallway. It's like, I start to twitch if people smell cabbage. I start to twitch if people get shoulder wounds.
Brilliant.
But you know, small, you know, and then of course there's the thing, you know, if you read about show don't tell, you often read about something called the telling detail, which is, if you can crack that, that's very good, because it's a thing that brings us immediately into the moment. And I remember the last time we spoke about the telling detail, I just made up on the spot this thing about going to visit your aunt's house and it smelt of wet dogs or something when you were in. And I said that, you know, tells us so much about her just as soon as you go. You know, if you drop into a scene, I mean, this is a very crass example actually, but if you drop into a scene sort of from nowhere and somebody's walking along a hot dusty street and a cow ambles across the road, you know, well, you're probably somewhere in India then, you know, so it's, hopefully the telling detail will be much more subtle than that. But these are things, the description, telling detail, these are things that can help really tremendously.
Yeah. And if you come from a background of kind of being writing at work, so business writing or journalist, you're probably going to struggle more the most.
absolute killer. This is another thing we were talking about the other day, isn't it? This is, I mean, I find this over and over and over again. People who have got careers as journalists, you know, very successful journalists, or who write, you know, they're very successful business careers and they write reports and so on all the time. The change from writing in that way to writing, especially fiction, is everything you've learned you have to just throw out, or not even throw out, just to turn it on its head.
Yeah.
So everything you've learned that you absolutely must not do, you really have to do with fiction. And funnily enough, one of the ways that this affects showing, don't telling is that, you know, journalists and in business writing, you're taught to use punctuation really sparingly, really sparingly. In fiction, punctuation can really help you. You know, a dash, a colon, an exclamation mark, which, you know, is for journalists is absolute no-no. All these things, not perhaps so much in the narrative, but certainly in the dialogue, can really help to warm things up. And that is what you need to do when you're showing, not telling. You are bringing warmth into your book. You're bringing warmth into your story, and you are. It's like dropping a little magic drop onto your page, and suddenly it infuses with color. You know, that's what you're doing.
Love it.
Hopefully.
A great example. Okay, I just think there are a few questions going to chat. Just don't forget, if you do want me to ask a question to Sal, put it in the question and answer box as well. I picked up on, I know, Michael, you asked how much show to use compared to tell, and I know some of these questions might be asked internally amongst the group, if you see what I mean. So that's absolutely fine, but I can't always see them in chat. So Sal, should we constantly try to show?
No, you get the balance right. If you constantly try to show, you're going to exhaust your reader.
Yeah.
I mean, it depends on the genre. It depends. I mean, if you've got a huge swirling historical epic, you are going to show much more. It depends on the story. It depends on what's happening. I mean, it's like I said, if you look at your favorite books, you'll see there are long tracts of just telling, but you don't notice because the showing is very good and the showing is dropped in. But no, not only showing it, that's too much. You'll give your reader eye strain if it's all just.
So a few questions are ready to go through, Sal. So let's start looking at a few of those. So we have one. So this is quite a long question. I'm just going to read it out. Is there a good tip to avoid showing while trying to describe moments when multiple characters are moving around the space? I find myself writing like it's boring, weird choreography that feels out of place with the tone and voice of the halfway good stuff surrounding it.
So that's not showing, that's over describing.
Right.
So, and it's a very, very, if I sounded a bit strict there, it's such an easy trap to fall into. This is what I said before. If this isn't something that comes naturally, and to a lot of writers it does come naturally, but to most writers it really doesn't. And writing is a skill. Writing is a skill that you get better at and you learn from. You know, a lot of authors, they can't look at their first book. It makes them cringe, you know, it horrifies them, or even their second or their third. So it becomes, you know, there's a thing called the Rumsfeld box, which I'm sure people are, you know, which is, we talked about before, which is unconsciously incompetent, consciously incompetent, etc., etc. With this skill, learning how to write by showing rather than telling, it's often something you have to practice. And the really great thing with the person who asked this question is they've identified the problem. That is so much more than half the battle won. If you know you're doing it, what you've just got to take time on. I mean, you know, because there will be a hallelujah moment. So take time, take that page, take that set paragraph or 3 paragraphs, or whatever it is, break it down, work on it. What can you lose? What am I trying to say? That is a very good question with this issue. What am I trying to say?
Yeah.
What do I want to get? What's the thing I want to get across here? What do I want? How do I want the reader to feel that they're in in this scene with me? Do they need to know every step that the dancer is taking, or do they need to know that they swept past gracefully the silk whispering as they passed? You know, so think about how you can use brief but telling descriptions.
Okay.
I don't know if that's helpful, but knowing that you're doing it is such a huge part of getting it sorted out.
So when you go, just going back to what you're saying about dialogue, can we just divert for a second into dialogue tags?
Yes,
you did mention. What do you? I can't remember. What you
I call them signifiers.
Signifiers. That's right.
And
And
I'm a rebel.
the argument around whether you use said rather than
I really am a rebel here, because I differ from almost everyone, but obviously I'm right and everyone else is wrong. That's the thing we have to hold on to here. Over and over and over again, you'll see the advice saying, just stick to said, don't get fancy, don't get clever, just stick to said. I really strongly disagree with this. And again, if you look at, you know, Sarah is a great example. Now, Sarah does use said, of course, everyone does, and you must use it. I'm not saying you must never use it. You must use it most. But he mumbled, she whispered, they sneered. Doesn't that tell you so much more?
Yeah.
Doesn't that give you so much more? So used wisely, and again, getting the balance right. You don't want every said is invisible. And, you know, people say good writing is invisible, which is true. You don't notice said unless what's very hard, and I don't mean difficult, I mean hard on the brain, is he said, she said, they said, he said, said. If you've got it in a sort of a big block of dialogue and it's just said, you do stumble on that. And a good writer will break that up with a few mutters or whispers or something. So you just use it. We're back again to the condiment, aren't we?
Yeah,
how have we gone so long without mentioning condiments? So for those who are not familiar with my well-worn example, you know, it's like having a bit of sauce on the side of your plate. You know, you don't want it all over your, well, some people do. You don't want to smother your food completely with ketchup, but a little bit will bring out the flavor. That's what you're after.
I love it. Thanks for that, Sal. There's some good conversation going on in chat around this point as well. And I know, so there's comments around scoring on Pro Writing Aid. Don't forget that Pro Writing Aid is you know, it's using an algorithm, it's machine learning, so it's not always as black and white. So there is an element of, you know, it's up to you as well to get to find that balance. I'm sure you'll agree. Okay, back into the questions. Chris, interesting one from Chris. Is there a danger that showing tends to rely more on passive voice?
Shouldn't do.
No.
That shouldn't do. I mean, and again,
it would be
this is advice that I do agree with. Try not to use passive voice. It makes the writing mushy, and it diminishes your authority as a writer if you use a passive voice. And it can be a hard habit to break, but it's a habit worth breaking, because it gives the narrative so much more authority if you're using the active voice.
Yeah.
If you can get, you know, if you can, I mean, I'm sure people are going to cite some very successful, though I'd be surprised actually, but I'm sure there are people who prefer the passive voice, but it's not, I don't think it's pleasant to read actually. Generally, it's a bit unnerving if it's used consistent. Of course, you can use it in dialogue naturally, and of course, I'm sure there are places where it comes up.
Yeah, but it shouldn't. It makes me wonder. Actually, it might be interesting to do a bit of a session on passive voice, because I think it's also commonly mistaken, and people commonly think it's a passive voice when actually you're not using a passive. Okay, so Farsis are showing using dialogue, but how much versus other environmental descriptions? Okay, so that's back to the point of balance, really.
It is. And I mean, gosh, can you hear the rain? It's really
well,
loud.
I can hear.
Yeah. Nothing must be shoehorned in. Okay, it's got to be natural. So I tell you what, very good examples you'll find for this is crime books, because there'll be a lot of telling. They walked across the field. They could see the evidence tent in the distance. They felt their stomachs clench. That's all telling. But then you've got one of them saying to the other, "This isn't going to be a good day, Sarge." And you're there with them just for a minute, and then they walk on. So it's just pulling us in very gently from it. It doesn't have to be huge tracts of dialogue.
Yeah.
In fact, for this purpose, just quick exchanges work really, really well.
Yeah. Okay. And Ian asks, says, I struggle to find the right balance between tell and show. If you keep using the 5 senses, it can drag the pace back.
Yes, it can. So again, I'm trying to think of a different way and this is no disrespect to the person who's answered the question. I don't mean it that way. I'm trying to think of a different way of approaching that question. You don't have to use all 5 senses. A smell, the taste of. I mean, look at Proust. The whole thing's kicked off by the taste of a cake. It starts the whole thing off. You can seeing somebody in a red coat. You do not have to use all the senses. It can just be a little check, a little touching base in a sensory way. So you don't have to overload your writing with sensory information. In fact, that will be too much, as you have correctly identified.
Yeah.
So pick the thing again, come back. What are you trying to say? What do you want your reader to know?
Yeah.
With this passage, with this bit, with this page, with this moment, what is it that you're telling your reader?
Yeah.
So will they get more from the taste of day-old bacon, or will they get more from the sound of a cuckoo outside? That's really evocative. That's going to place you somewhere. Or will they get more from seeing that man in the blue scarf again? What is going to give them the most at that moment in that particular scene in your book? What is going to help them most? That's what you need to focus on.
I love that suggestion, Sal. I also love your examples. I always love your examples. I don't know where you get them from. Day old bacon. So that's almost as good as the hunt for weasel eggs that we had a few months ago, which is.
But it would be a very vivid taste, day old bacon. I'm guessing. It would tell you that they left a day ago, would it not? So
combined with the smell of weasel eggs. Okay. But yes, back to the point. So K.A. Turnbull, how do you use showing to replace some dialogue tags when your scenes have more than two characters speaking among each other?
When you've got a lot of people speaking, dialogue tags are very important. And you use the show and tell, not the show and tell, you use the showing in the dialogue tags. So it's really simple. So I don't know what you mean. He was standing by the window languorously, his blonde hair flopping over his forehead. There you go. You've showed. And it's broken up the dialogue. And you know who we're talking about because he's the only blonde man in the room. Bingo, done. So but please write it better than what I just said. So these are really great, what I call signifiers, dialogue tags are very, very good places to show. and to give information and to give information about the people. You can remind people what your characters look like. You can remind people how old your characters are. You can remind people of their sort of demeanor. You know, you can do, but you can also give people more information about the place that they're in. You can also give more information about the weather. You can give more information about, you know, I mean, it's never ending. Yeah. So the patter of rain on a, not so much a patter as a machine gun rattle now of rain on the skylight. You know, these are things that will all bring us into the story and tell us more, because this is what you've got to do. You've always got to think of your reader. Yeah. What do you want your reader to know? What will help your reader? What will bring your reader into that moment? This is what you've got to focus on all the time. And it can be the thing that goes to the wayside when you're, certainly in the first draft of your book, it can be very easy to forget about your reader. So this is one of the things you've really got to focus on. And if you're focusing on the needs of your reader, a lot of these things should start to come a bit more naturally. Can I just, I feel like I'm not talking very clearly, and I'm so sorry. I've got this thing with my jaw called TMJ.
Oh.
And it's really, really bad today. And I can't, some people would, I can't open my mouth very wide. So I know I'm sort of mumbling a bit, and I am sorry.
No, Sal, you're coming through loud and clear. So
if I do open my mouth wide, it might lock, and none of us want that. That would be very, very bad. So I think I'm a bit mumbly. I do apologise.
We can hear you even above the rain. Don't worry.
Excellent.
Okay. So let's have look. Now you've started a torrent of well wishes, Sal, in the chat box.
Well, thank you.
Okay, so I think, I mean, we've got a couple more questions. So if anyone else has got a question, do please get it in, because we'll work through these questions and then wrap this session up. But we've got a couple to get through first. So I'm sorry, I'm just trying to make sense of this one. Whose eyes to sense the scene when multiple characters are present? I'm not quite sure.
Well, it depends. I mean, if it's third person. So let's break that question down again. Read it one more time, please.
So, whose eyes to sense the scene when multiple characters present?
So I think what is being asked is whose point of view is the scene through if multiple characters are present. That can only be judged by you as the author. If it's third person, you can tell us a lot by whose point of view you give us. You know, that in itself is giving the reader a rich source of information, because if we suddenly see the main protagonist through the eyes of another character, through the eyes of a child, or through the eyes of the doorman, or through the eyes of somebody on the periphery of a fight, you know, we're going to get a completely different look at them. So wisdom would normally say stick with, you know, obviously if it's first person you haven't got any choice, but if it's third person, wisdom would usually say sort of kind of stick with the same point of view, or the same 2 or 3 points of view throughout. But if you suddenly switch, that can be really effective. Like I said, to the only problem with that is, we can get back to Chekhov again, a thing called Chekhov's gun, where Chekhov said, never, if you put a gun on the wall, if you hang a gun on the wall in the first act, it's got to go off by the end of the third, or words to that effect. Because your reader's there, and then they think there's a gun there. Someone's going to get that gun, someone's going to grab that gun, and someone's going to get shot. And if they don't, you're just constantly waiting for that gun to go off. Now, if you suddenly switch POV to a child, for example, the danger is that your reader's going to think that child's going to be important. We just got that child's point of view. He'll be coming back. I've got to remember that child. So if you do it, you've got to give the scene closure. You've got to somehow tell your reader that that child's not going to come back. It was just a moment. And that sounds very difficult, but actually it's not that difficult. It's pretty easy once you're in the swing of it. Yeah. But yes, suddenly switching POV can be really, really effective. It's a good question. All good questions, by the way.
There they are. We do love it. And I know we don't always get to every single one. And I know some of them are slightly off topic. I will try and get to those this evening as well. So do include those.
We can take some off-topic ones. That's not a problem.
Especially now in these longer, sorry, not in these longer sessions, but in these sessions where we've got a bit more time for Q&A. Okay, and well, in fact, on that very point, I've just had another request. I know it's not the subject at hand, but you've touched on it. Please explain the passive voice. Now, I think we should probably have a longer session on this rather than do it in one go. So if you bear with us, maybe Sally, maybe you and I can talk about how we could bring that into next month.
We did do active and passive, didn't we? So I think we can revisit it. It's a long thing, and I think especially if somebody doesn't understand it, it's very important to deconstruct it and do it properly. It's a very good question, and it's something that bothers people a lot. So I would be delighted to address it properly, but I think it's a longer run up than we've got tonight. I think
one thing that may help is if you are using Pro Writing Aid and it flags a passive voice in your writing, there is a small an icon with an eye in the middle of it on the pop-up on your page. If you click that, that's our kind of integrated learning, and it will open a new box, and it will it has a short article about the passive voice and also a video explainer telling you the difference between the active and the passive voice, and a link to a longer blog article.
Oh, what a great idea.
Well, you can just go on the Pro Writing Aid blog and search passive voice, and there's plenty of stuff in there. It's something particularly on the business writing side as well. We deal with a lot. So there are lots of resources on the site. Okay, back to the questions. Is there a particular difference in show don't tell you could identify between adult and children's fiction?
Well, I don't do children's fiction, as you know. Yes. Or maybe obviously you don't know. I imagine the difference is quite significant, actually, when you're writing for children, especially for young children. But I always joke about this, but it does sadden me a bit. But I can't do children's fiction for some reason.
Because you do too many other genres already, Sal. Maybe that
could be that. But I'm very bad at judging the children's market. So I've said this before, there's a Michael Rosen book, We're Going on a Bear Hunt. Yeah. If I'd been given that, I'd have said, this is rubbish. Children aren't going to like this. This is a load of old nonsense. Are you going on the bear hunt or not? So, I'm terrible. So I'm sorry that I can't answer that definitively, but I imagine that it's the significant difference. Yes.
Yes, I think you're right. And I should have made that point earlier, Sal, about not, you're not doing children's fiction. And thank you, Jim, by the way, in chat for using a great passive voice example, just to demonstrate the point about the passive. Okay, Francis, interesting question. When writing a police procedural, I often have interrogation scenes. These turn into long passages of dialogue. I try to break them up with emotion and minor action, jotting a note, standing up, tipping a chair. But
right, that's really good.
But it's difficult to avoid getting tiresome. Any ideas how to improve here?
So without seeing, it's difficult. Your instinct is great. What you just said is really good. My question is, are you information dumping in these scenes? And are you also using a lot of exposition? Are you using the conversation between the policeman, listen to me, the conversation between the policeman, between the police person and the detective and the person in custody to tell the audience, the reader, things that they should know? So are you basically having them telling each other things that they already know? That's one question. If you are, cut that back. If you're not doing that, you've still got to cut it back. You've got to get to the heart of what you want. Again, it's very tempting, I know, to chuck everything in, and certainly in the first draft, chuck it all in. I always say this, but you've got to think of your reader. You've got to think, what do I need the reader to know in this scene?
Yeah.
Really, I just need them to know that the glove was found in the flower bed. That's all I really need to know. Now, it's going to be a bit crass if I just have a very short scene of the detective saying, we found the glove in the flower bed, and the perp going, oh no, but you know, so but focus on the stuff that you need to be telling us. You need to be telling us stuff about what's happened in the plot. That's what they're telling us. You need to be telling us a bit about the detective, if that's the main character, or even if it's not, you need to be they are not. You need to be telling us a bit about the criminal. And so this is, I don't know what's happened to my language tonight, the criminal, but anyway, that person. So focus on what the reader needs to get from the scene, and then focus on the best and most interesting and rich and informative way you can tell them that, without information dump, without exposition, and without without waffling on. And I'm using terms like exposition and so on. I'm sort of guessing that everyone here knows what I'm talking about, but if anyone doesn't, please do just ask and I will explain.
Okay, thanks, Sal. So one from Razi: how do you show emotions when the character tries to hide them, or perhaps this character is strongly self-professed?
Strongly
Professed.
Well, you know what the obvious thing is, so I urge you against it, would be a facial tic or something like that. But what you've got to do is think about people, think about yourself. What do you do if you're trying not to give something away, or if you're trying not to show emotion? People's hands go,
oh sorry, self-possessed. Sorry, Sal, Raz has just corrected that.
Do you know what? I kind of thought you meant self-possessed.
I didn't even twig.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
I was doing a beautiful mime there about what you do if you're trying not to show emotion. And one thing that people do a lot is they put their hand over their mouth. It's really basic stuff. They try and they will try and use their hands but they will also hold their hands sort of still, because they don't want to give things away with their hands. So have a think. Put yourself. A very good thing for any kind of scene is make yourself act it out. People are always very taken aback when I say this, and I always use this example of knowing an author who found a Victorian keyhole and bent down and looked through the keyhole because they wanted to know what you could see through a Victorian keyhole.
Yes.
This is the kind of stuff you've got to be doing. You've got to get out there and do your footwork, people. So if you're trying to show emotion without showing emotion, put yourself in the scene. What would you do? How would you act? What would you say? You're really panicking, but you don't want anyone to see that. So my immediate reaction is my hand goes to my neck. I don't know why.
Body language.
A body language expert will be able to tell you why. So just think, put yourself in there. That's the best way. But very good question. These are hard things to do.
Yeah.
Okay. And of course your housemates will think you're mad.
Yes. We need to start wrapping this up. There are a couple of others. And so Ian as mentioned, sorry, this is not relevant to the topic, but you wanted to let some of your writing group know about Pro-Writing Aid events and material you'd like a share button. I'm going to pass that on to our team, Ian. I think there is a share, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's a follow us button actually on the blog, but I'll look into that and pass it on to that team if it's something we can do. Okay, we've got to, how do I end the story and leave the possibility for a sequel? So that's not related to what we're doing tonight.
I can answer that.
Yeah, that would be a good one. Let's go with that.
You can't, what you have to remember is if you're doing, I mean, I've talked about this before, if you're doing a trilogy, say, so your trilogy's got to have its overriding arc, right? That's got to have it's like Freytag's pyramid. It's got to have its beginning, its climax, and its falling action and its end. But so you've got your overriding arc of the trilogy, but each book in the trilogy has to have its own arc. So you can't leave any of the books, you can't leave the first book open. You have to close your first book, you have to finish it. You have to give the reader a sense of closure. If you want to lead us into the next book, it's better not to just introduce something on the last page. It's better to seed it from at least the middle of the book, gently, subtly, and then give us a sort of bit of a heftier clue towards the end of the book, not necessarily on the last page. Because what you don't want is somebody to finish a book and think, oh, this doesn't feel finished. What did that mean? So it's quite it's a delicate tightrope walk. Yeah. But if you see something throughout, again, if you think of everyone's got their own favorite trilogy or book that that has a sequel. If you think about how it's done, there it's often just a whisper. It's often just a whisper. On the other hand, sometimes it's a huge brass band with 76 trombones. It's just the way you want to do it. But the main point is make sure that your book has proper closure. It's got to have its own story arc. So don't leave a sort of ending open. I mean, wide open, doors open, horse gone. Don't do that.
Yeah. So we're going to end with this question, and it comes from Sandra, and she's asked about internal thoughts of the main character. So the internal thoughts of the main character, are these good for show, not tell? Or is that still too close to telling?
No, internal thoughts are great. Put them in italics, ideally. So it's very clear that that's what they are.
Okay, so she's used the example, an example sentence, he looked at the wall and wondered how this cold, smooth surface could be all that
I see.
Of the city.
No, that's great. That's really good. That's not, I thought you meant literal internal thoughts like, what am I doing in this dump? But, but I don't know why I was put on this awful accent when I did that. But either one, yes, definitely. Very good, subtle way of doing it, actually. So yes, hurrah.
Great. And with that, I think we're going to bring today's session. I must stop saying this evening. I know it's not this evening for many of you. We're going to bring today's session to an end. So as ever, a huge thank you for joining us and putting up with us for another hour, giving us an hour of your precious time. We do hope you found it useful. We're sorry we don't get to all questions. I'm sorry we ramble on a bit sometimes, me especially, but it's great to have you with us. And we look forward to seeing you in a month's time, right, Sal?
Absolutely. And I have to say, I think we're great. Nothing wrong with a bit of rambling. Absolutely. And what I always say is just thank you all so much. We quite literally could not do this without you. It's so appreciated that you turn up here every month, contribute, make it what it is, ask such great questions, and thank you all so much for joining us. We'll see you. And what are we doing next month, Tom?
Oh, there's a question. What are we doing next month? We are doing, unless someone else jumps in there before me, I should know this.
I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
No, I have got it in front of me. It is, we're talking about research. Yeah, we're doing research, book research.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, actually, I'm going to.
That'll be all about peering through Victorian keyholes, right?
Something like that. I'm going to give you a little taster of research, which is something that came up in between the last session and this one. I'm always talking about one of my favourite authors to use as an example is Elizabeth George, as you may well all know, who writes mysteries, sort of crime thrillers. I think she's a master of her art. And interestingly, I have been trying to get my sister to read Elizabeth George for years. And she told me recently that she'd read a couple and she said, I'm not reading anymore. And I was shocked. I was shocked to my core. Why not? And she reminded me of something, because Elizabeth George has been writing the same series for, I think, about 20 years now. I'd forgotten how I felt reading the first 2 or 3 books. And interestingly, what happens, and I hope, I don't feel Elizabeth George is going to be watching this, but if she is, I love your books. But she's an American writer and the stories are set in England. And what she did with the first 3, I think she came to England, she did a ton of research. And I can tell you that she did, because some of the books were set in places that I lived, and I could see she'd literally walked around the streets and made notes of stuff, and she'd really absorbed English culture. But she had not developed her ear well enough. So this won't really mean anything to American, or maybe it will to American readers, but I remember one book. First of all, she had everyone in England talking about the royal family and quoting Shakespeare, which we honestly don't all the time, because she's an Anglophile and you know, enjoyed that aspect of our culture. But the other thing was the small details of, she had somebody eating a packet of vinegar crisps. We don't have vinegar crisps, we have salt and vinegar crisps. It sounds like a very small thing, but it's actually a huge thing. It's that it then makes the needle screech off the record. So even somebody as fantastic as Elizabeth George, you see, that was my George, even when she's done a ton of research, it's important. My point that I'm getting to is to get a good editor. And I think she had an American editor, and after the first 2 or 3 books, she got somebody with an English eye to look over the books. And either she'd spent more time in England, but these problems disappeared. So, you know, it's easy to go wrong, even when you try really, really hard. But do try really, really hard, because you'll get it right in the end, is kind of where I'm going with this. I think I've lost the battle with my sister, but I'll keep trying.
You told me that before, so it's a great example. But so yes, we'll go into that in more detail in November, so in a month's time, and we'll be back to Tuesday, so the second Tuesday of the month. So slightly different. This was just a 1 month only because of Romance Week. So thank you once again for joining us. We look forward to seeing you in I guess just over 3 weeks' time, and bring your questions. We look forward to answering them all then. Have a safe rest of your day, and we'll see you all soon. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.